Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. I think I didn't do anything wrong, just let myself have a little fun when my ex flirted with me at the party. But when my husband turned his head and saw the way I smiled, everything changed. 2 weeks later, I was handed a thick envelope from his lawyer, and suddenly, I was the one feeling betrayed. The music at the Nook was loud enough to drown out my thoughts, which was exactly what I needed after another silent dinner with Owen. My husband had barely looked up from his grading papers when I announced I was going out with my sister Joss. He just nodded, like he always did, and went back to his red pen corrections. "You look amazing tonight, Effie," Joss said, raising her wine glass. "That dress is definitely working for you." I smoothed down the black cocktail dress I'd bought last month but never worn. Owen hadn't even noticed when I walked out the door. "Thanks. I needed this. Owen's been so distant lately." "Maybe he's just stressed with the school year starting," Joss offered, but I could hear the doubt in her voice. She'd witnessed enough of our awkward interactions to know something was off. That's when I saw him. Silas Drummond, my ex from college, walking through the crowd with that same confident swagger that had attracted me 15 years ago. He looked good, really good. His realtor success had clearly been treating him well. "Euphemia Marchbanks," he said, appearing at our table with a grin that made my stomach flutter. "I thought that was you." "It's Effie now," I said, standing to give him what I intended to be a casual hug, but his hands lingered on my waist longer than they should have, and instead of pulling away, I found myself smiling, really smiling, for the first time in weeks. "You look incredible," Silas said, his eyes traveling down my dress appreciatively. "Marriage is definitely agreeing with you." I felt a familiar warmth spread through my chest. When was the last time Owen had complimented me like that? When was the last time he'd even really looked at me? "Thanks," I said, not mentioning that my marriage felt more like a business arrangement these days. "You're looking pretty good yourself. I heard the real estate business is booming." "Can't complain," he said, signaling the bartender for another round. "Though I have to say, seeing you again is definitely the highlight of my week." Joss cleared her throat. "I'm going to freshen up," she said, giving me a look that clearly meant, "Be careful." But I was already lost in the attention Silas was giving me. We talked for an hour, falling back into the easy conversation we'd always had. He remembered details about me that Owen seemed to have forgotten. How I liked my coffee, my favorite movies, the way I laughed when I was genuinely happy instead of just being polite. "Dance with me," Silas said when a slow song came on. I should have said no. I should have remembered that I was married, that my husband was at home grading papers, and probably wondering when I'd be back. Instead, I let Silas lead me to the small dance floor. His hands found my waist again, pulling me closer than appropriate for a married woman dancing with her ex. But it felt so good to be wanted, to be the center of someone's attention instead of background noise in my own home. "I've missed this," he whispered in my ear, his breath warm against my neck. "Missed what?" I asked, though I knew exactly what he meant. "You. The way you used to look at me. The way you're looking at me right now." I was about to respond when I caught sight of Owen across the bar. He was standing near the entrance, still in his teaching clothes, khakis and a button-down that had seen better days. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were locked on Silas's hands around my waist. Instead of pulling away, instead of looking embarrassed or guilty, I did something that would haunt me for weeks to come. I smirked. Actually smirked, like I was proud to be caught in another man's arms. Owen's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. He turned around and walked out without a word. "Was that your husband?" Silas asked, having followed my gaze. "Yeah," I said, but I didn't move away from him. "He's probably just going home to his papers. He lives for that stuff." But even as I said it, something cold settled in my stomach. The way Owen had looked at me, it wasn't hurt or anger, it was something much worse. It was disappointment and maybe calculation. When I got home 2 hours later, Owen was in the guest bedroom. I could see the light under the door, but when I knocked, he didn't answer. "Owen?" I called softly. "Can we talk?" "I'm tired, Effie. We'll talk tomorrow." But tomorrow came and went, and Owen seemed more distant than ever. He was polite, functional, but there was something different about him. He started coming home later from school, claiming extra meetings and tutoring sessions. He stopped asking about my day or sharing stories about his students. Most unsettling of all, I caught him on his laptop late one night, quickly closing windows when I walked into the room. "What were you looking at?" I asked. "Just school stuff," he said, but his voice was tight. I tried to convince myself that I was imagining things, that Owen was just going through a phase, but deep down, I knew that smirk at the Nook had changed something fundamental between us, and if I was being honest with myself, I wasn't entirely sorry about it. 3 days after the incident at the Nook, I was still replaying that moment in my mind, not with guilt, with a strange sense of vindication. Owen had seen me with Silas, seen that other men still found me attractive, and what had he done? Nothing. He'd just walked away like he couldn't be bothered to fight for me. "You're distracted today," my coworker Linda said, as I stared at my computer screen. The insurance claim I was supposed to be processing forgotten. "Everything okay at home?" "Owen's being weird," I said, grateful for someone to talk to. "Cold, distant. I think he might be having some kind of midlife crisis." Linda raised an eyebrow. "Weird how?" "He's been staying late at school, barely talks to me when he gets home. And last night I found him looking at some website that he quickly closed when I walked in. Probably shopping for some expensive hobby he thinks will make him feel young again." It was easier to paint Owen as the problem than to examine my own behavior. The truth was, I'd been texting with Silas since that night. Nothing inappropriate, just friendly conversations about old times and current lives. But the attention felt like water to someone dying of thirst. "Maybe you should plan a romantic evening," Linda suggested. "Remind him what he's got at home." I almost laughed. When was the last time Owen had initiated anything romantic? When was the last time he'd looked at me the way Silas had that night? My phone buzzed with a text from Silas. "Lunch today. I know a great little place downtown." I stared at the message for a long moment. It was just lunch. 2 old friends catching up. There was nothing wrong with that. "Sure," I typed back. "Noon work?" At home that evening, Owen was in the kitchen making Ruby's lunch for the next day. Our 8-year-old daughter was at the table working on homework, her dark hair falling across her face in concentration. "How was work?" Owen asked without looking up from the sandwich he was assembling. "Fine," I said. "Had lunch with an old friend." Now he looked at me, and there was something sharp in his expression. "Anyone I know?" "Just someone from college. We ran into each other the other night and decided to catch up." Ruby looked up from her math homework. "Daddy, why have you been sleeping in the guest room?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Owen and I both froze. "Sometimes grown-ups need space to think," Owen said carefully. "It doesn't mean anything's wrong." But Ruby wasn't stupid. At 8, she was already too perceptive for her own good. "Are you and Mommy fighting?" "No, sweetheart," I said quickly. "Daddy's just been having trouble sleeping, and he doesn't want to keep me awake." Owen's jaw tightened at my lie, but he didn't contradict me in front of Ruby. Later, after Ruby was in bed, I tried to talk to him. "We need to discuss what's happening between us." "Do we?" Owen said, not looking up from the papers he was grading. "Because it seems like you've already made your decisions." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I saw you at the Nook, Effie. I saw how you looked at him, and how you looked at me." My cheeks burned. "It was just dancing. You're being paranoid." "Am I?" He finally looked at me, and his eyes were colder than I'd ever seen them. "Tell me, Effie, when you saw me watching you in another man's arms, what was your first instinct? To pull away? To look embarrassed? Or to smirk like you'd won some kind of game?" The accuracy of his observation hit me like a slap, but instead of admitting fault, I doubled down. Maybe if you paid half as much attention to me at home as you do to those papers, I wouldn't need to find conversation elsewhere. Conversation, Owen repeated flatly. Is that what we're calling it? Yes, that's what we're calling it because that's what it is. God, Owen, you act like I committed adultery because I talked to an old friend. Something flickered across his face. Hurt, maybe, or disappointment. But when he spoke, his voice was steady. You're right. I'm sorry for overreacting. I've just been stressed with work. The apology should have made me feel better, but something about it felt wrong. Too easy. Too controlled. The next morning, I was getting ready for work when I noticed Owen's laptop was open on the kitchen counter. He was upstairs showering, and curiosity got the better of me. The screen showed a banking website, but not our usual joint account. This was something called Owen Marchbank's individual checking account, with a balance that made my stomach drop. He'd moved a significant amount of money into an account I didn't have access to. Find what you were looking for? I spun around to find Owen standing in the doorway, fully dressed, his hair still damp from the shower. What is this? I demanded, pointing at the screen. It's a bank account. I can see that. Why do you have a secret bank account? It's not secret. I just opened it last week, and I'm not required to clear my financial decisions with you, especially given recent circumstances. Recent circumstances? What are you talking about? But Owen was already closing the laptop and putting it in his work bag. I need to get to school early today. We'll talk tonight. Except we didn't talk that night, or the next night. Owen became a master of polite avoidance, always having something else to do when I tried to bring up the bank account or our relationship. Meanwhile, my lunch dates with Silas became a regular thing. He was everything Owen wasn't: attentive, complimentary, interested in what I had to say. He made me feel alive in a way I'd forgotten was possible. Your husband's a fool, Silas said over our third lunch date. If I had a woman like you at home, I'd never take you for granted. Owen's not a bad person, I said, though the defense felt hollow. He's just settled, comfortable. He thinks marriage means he doesn't have to try anymore. Is that what you want? To be taken for granted? No, I said, and meant it. I want to feel like I matter, like I'm more than just the person who handles the grocery shopping and remembers to sign permission slips. Silas reached across the table and covered my hand with his. You matter, Effie. You matter a lot. The touch sent electricity up my arm, and I didn't pull away. That night, Owen was on his laptop again, and this time, he didn't bother hiding what he was doing when I walked in. Research for class? I asked sarcastically. Something like that, he said, closing the laptop anyway. Owen, we need to talk about what's happening here. I agree, he said, standing up. But not tonight. I want to have a proper conversation, and I need a few more days to get my thoughts together. A few more days, for what? But he was already heading upstairs, leaving me alone with my growing unease and the memory of Silas's hand on mine. Something was building between Owen and me, something that felt like a storm gathering on the horizon. And despite my justifications and rationalizations, I was starting to suspect that when it finally hit, I wasn't going to like the weather. The text from Silas came on a Thursday afternoon, while I was pretending to work on a particularly boring insurance claim. My place tonight? I'll cook dinner. Nothing fancy, just two old friends catching up. I stared at the message for a full 5 minutes. Going to his apartment would be crossing a line that I'd been carefully dancing around for weeks. But Owen had been even more distant lately, barely speaking to me except when Ruby was around to witness our interactions. Can't tonight, I typed back, then immediately deleted it. What was I afraid of? I was a grown woman who deserved to have friends and social interactions. If Owen was too wrapped up in his mysterious projects and late-night internet browsing to pay attention to his wife, that wasn't my fault. Sounds nice, I sent instead. What time? At home, Owen was in the kitchen helping Ruby with her science project, something about plant growth that required daily measurements and careful note-taking. They were both bent over her notebook, Owen's patient voice explaining how to record the data properly. "I'm going out tonight," I announced. "Dinner with Joss." Owen looked up, and for a moment I thought he was going to question me. Instead, he just nodded. "What time should I expect you home?" "I'm not sure. You know how Joss gets when she starts talking about work drama." "Of course," Owen said, turning back to Ruby's project. "Drive safe." The ease with which he accepted my lie should have made me feel guilty. Instead, it made me angry. He didn't even care enough to be suspicious. Silas's apartment was in one of the newer complexes downtown, all modern fixtures and open floor plans. He answered the door in jeans and a button-down that was casual but clearly expensive. "You look beautiful," he said, kissing my cheek in greeting. The kiss lingered just a moment too long, his lips brushing closer to my mouth than was appropriate. "Thank you," I said, stepping into his space. "This place is gorgeous." "Thanks. It's a bit much for just me, but I like having room to entertain." He'd made chicken masala and opened a bottle of wine that probably cost more than Owen and I usually spent on groceries in a week. We sat on his couch after dinner, the conversation flowing as easily as the wine. "Can I ask you something?" Silas said, refilling my glass. "Are you happy?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "In your marriage, with your life, you seem, I don't know, like you're going through the motions." I took a large sip of wine before answering. Marriage isn't like the movies, you know. It's not all passion and romance. It's paying bills and raising kids and trying to remember to pick up milk on the way home. That sounds awful. It's not awful, it's just routine. Owen's a good father and a decent provider, but sometimes I feel like I'm invisible. Like I could disappear tomorrow and he'd only notice when he ran out of clean shirts. Silas moved closer on the couch. "His loss?" "Is it, though? Sometimes I wonder if I'm the problem. Maybe I expect too much." "You expect to be seen, to be appreciated." "That's not too much, Effie. That's basic human need." His hand found mine again, and this time I didn't pretend it was innocent. This time I turned my palm up and let our fingers intertwine. "I should go," I said, but I didn't move. "Should you?" Silas asked, his thumb tracing circles on my wrist. "Yes," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. "When was the last time someone made you feel desired?" he asked, his voice low. "Really desired, not just tolerated." I couldn't remember. That was the horrible truth. I genuinely could not remember the last time Owen had looked at me like he wanted me, not just like I was a familiar piece of furniture. Silas leaned closer, and I could smell his cologne, could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "You deserve better than being taken for granted." When he kissed me, I kissed him back. It was soft at first, tentative, but when I didn't pull away, it deepened into something hungry and desperate. All the loneliness and frustration of the past months poured into that kiss. We didn't sleep together that night. I pulled away before things went that far, mumbling excuses about needing to get home. But the line had been crossed, and we both knew it. "This can't happen again," I said as Silas walked me to my car. "Can't it?" he asked, but he didn't push. "Text me when you get home safe." I drove home in a daze, my lips still tingling and my conscience at war with my libido. Owen was already in the guest room when I got back, the house dark and quiet. I lay in our empty bed, staring at the ceiling and trying to convince myself that one kiss didn't make me a cheater. It was just a moment of weakness, a brief lapse in judgment. It didn't mean anything, but even as I told myself these lies, I was already planning when I could see Silas again. The next few weeks fell into a pattern. Owen continued his polite distance, spending more time at school and on his laptop. I continued my lunches with Silas, which gradually evolved into afternoon visits to his apartment. We kissed, we talked, We flirted with the idea of more, but I always pulled back before things went too far. "You're killing me here," Silas said one afternoon as I gathered my things to leave. "Either you want this or you don't." "It's complicated," I said, the same excuse I'd been using for weeks. "It's only complicated because you're making it complicated. You're unhappy, Effie. Your husband clearly doesn't appreciate what he has. Why are you torturing yourself by staying loyal to someone who barely notices you exist?" "He's Ruby's father." "So, plenty of divorced people co-parent successfully. Ruby would probably be happier with parents who are actually happy." The rationalization was seductive. Maybe Silas was right. Maybe I was wasting my life trying to save a marriage that was already dead. Maybe Owen would be relieved to be free of a wife he clearly didn't want anymore. "I need time to think," I said. "Don't think too long," Silas replied, pulling me close for another kiss. "I'm not going to wait forever." That night, Ruby asked the question I'd been dreading. "Mommy, are you and Daddy getting divorced?" We were at the dinner table, Owen carefully cutting his chicken, while pretending he wasn't listening intently to my answer. "Why would you ask that, sweetheart?" "Because Tommy's parents got divorced last year, and before it happened, his dad moved into their guest room, and his mum started staying out late, and they stopped talking to each other except about Tommy." The accuracy of her observation was startling. Owen finally looked up, his eyes meeting mine across the table. "Your father and I are just going through a rough patch," I said carefully. "All marriages have them." "But you're going to fix it, right?" Ruby asked, her voice small and worried. "We're going to try," Owen said before I could answer. "Sometimes grown-ups need to work through their problems, and that takes time." After Ruby went to bed, Owen approached me in the kitchen where I was loading the dishwasher. "We need to talk," he said. "Really talk, not just exchange pleasantries and logistics." My heart started racing. Did he know about Silas? Had someone seen us together? "Okay," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "When?" "Tomorrow night, after Ruby's in bed. I think it's time we both put our cards on the table." The way he said it made my blood run cold. There was something final about it, something that suggested he knew more than he was letting on. "Owen," I started, but he held up a hand. "Tomorrow night, Effie. We'll talk tomorrow night." As he walked away, I noticed he was carrying a manila folder I'd never seen before. Something told me that whatever was in that folder was going to change everything. And despite all my justifications and rationalizations, I was finally starting to be afraid. I spent all of Friday distracted and anxious, jumping every time my phone rang and checking the clock obsessively. Owen had been unusually calm that morning, making Ruby's breakfast and packing her lunch with the same methodical precision he brought to everything. But there was something different about his demeanor. He seemed resolved. "You're jittery today," Linda observed as I fumbled with the same insurance form for the third time. "Hot date tonight." The irony of her comment wasn't lost on me. I'd cancelled my afternoon plans with Silas, claiming I wasn't feeling well. The truth was, I couldn't shake the feeling that Owen's promised conversation was going to be more serious than I'd anticipated. "Just tired," I said. "Owen and I are supposed to have a talk tonight about things." "Things?" "Our marriage. It's been rocky lately." Linda raised an eyebrow. "Rocky how? I thought you said he was just being distant." I realized I'd never told Linda about Silas, never mentioned that my marriage problems might be more complicated than a simple rough patch. The omission suddenly felt significant. "It's complicated," I said, the same phrase I'd been using with Silas. When I got home, Owen was already there, which was unusual. He was in the kitchen with Ruby, helping her with homework again, but he looked up when I walked in. "How was work?" he asked, the same question he asked every day, but today it felt loaded. "Fine," I said. "You're home early." I wanted to spend some time with Ruby before we talk. The way he said "we talk" made it sound like a business meeting rather than a conversation between spouses. I went upstairs to change, my hands shaking slightly as I hung up my work clothes. Dinner was tense despite Ruby's chatter about her day at school. Owen was attentive to our daughter, but barely looked at me, and I found myself studying his face for clues about what he might know. After Ruby's bath and bedtime story, Owen and I found ourselves alone in the living room. He sat in his usual chair, but instead of the remote or a book, he had that manila folder in his hands. "So," I said, settling onto the couch and trying to project casualness, "what did you want to talk about?" Owen opened the folder and pulled out a sheet of paper. "I wanted to start with this." He handed me what appeared to be a bank statement, but not for any account I recognized. It showed regular deposits and several large withdrawals, all within the past month. "I don't understand," I said, though a cold dread was settling in my stomach. "It's a new account I opened. I've been moving money into it gradually, along with setting up some other financial arrangements." "What kind of arrangements?" Instead of answering directly, Owen pulled out another paper. This one made my blood freeze. "Divorce papers," I whispered, staring at the legal document. "Filed yesterday," Owen said calmly. "I wanted to have this conversation before you were served officially, but the process is already in motion." I felt like I'd been slapped. "Owen, what? Why would you? We can work through whatever problems we're having." "Can we?" He reached into the folder again and pulled out a photograph. It showed me and Silas outside his apartment building, his arm around my waist, my face turned up toward his in obvious intimacy. My mouth went dry. "Where did you get this?" "I took it," Owen said matter-of-factly, "along with several others over the past few weeks." He spread more photos across the coffee table, like playing cards. Me and Silas at lunch. Me and Silas walking to his apartment. Me and Silas kissing in his doorway. "You followed me," I managed to croak. "I didn't have to follow you very far. You weren't exactly being discreet." I stared at the photos, my mind racing for explanations, excuses, anything that might minimize the damage. "It's not what it looks like." Owen's laugh was bitter. "Effie, I have photos of you kissing another man. What exactly do you think it looks like?" We didn't sleep together," I said desperately. We were just talking, and things got a little out of hand, but nothing really happened." "Nothing really happened," Owen repeated. "Is that what you call lying to me for weeks? Meeting your ex-boyfriend in secret, kissing him while your daughter asks me why Mommy doesn't come home for dinner anymore?" The mention of Ruby hit me like a physical blow. You can't use Ruby against me. I'm not using her against you. I'm protecting her from the chaos you've brought into our home. Owen pulled out more papers from the folder. "Text messages," he said, showing me printed screenshots of my conversations with Silas. "Did you know that phone records are pretty easy to obtain when you're on the same plan? And that your phone automatically backs up to the cloud?" I looked at the messages, seeing them through Owen's eyes. The flirting, the complaints about my marriage, the increasingly intimate tone of our conversations. It looked damning because it was damning. "Owen, please," I said, tears starting to fall. "I made a mistake. I was lonely and confused, and I made a terrible mistake. But we can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can work through this together." "Can we?" Owen asked. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been working through your loneliness just fine. With Silas." "I'll stop seeing him. I'll block his number. I'll never speak to him again. Just please don't do this to our family." Owen was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. "Do you remember what you did when you saw me watching you dance with him that night at the Nook?" The question caught me off guard. "What?" "You smirked. You saw your husband watching you in another man's arms, and you smirked like you were proud of it." The memory came flooding back, and I felt sick. I didn't mean..." "You did mean it," Owen said quietly. "That's when I knew our marriage was over. Not because you were attracted to someone else. Not even because you acted on that attraction. But because when you had the chance to show remorse or embarrassment, or any sign that you understood you'd crossed a line, you chose to gloat instead." I wanted to deny it, but the words stuck in my throat, because he was right. In that moment, I had felt triumphant. I had wanted him to see that someone else desired me. "I want you to move out," Owen continued. "I'll give you 30 days to find a place and get settled. Ruby will stay here with me during the school week and spend weekends with you once you're established somewhere. You can't take my daughter away from me. I'm not taking her away. I'm providing stability while you figure out what you want your life to look like. The custody arrangement is temporary, and we can revisit it once things settle." I looked at the papers scattered across the coffee table, the photos, the text messages, the bank statements, the divorce filing. Owen had been planning this for weeks, maybe longer, while I'd been playing house with Silas and telling myself I wasn't really doing anything wrong. "How long have you known?" I asked. I suspected something was off for a while, but I didn't have proof until I saw you two together that night. After that, it wasn't hard to confirm. "Why didn't you confront me sooner?" Owen's smile was sad. "Because I kept hoping I was wrong. I kept thinking that maybe you'd come to your senses and end it before it went too far. I gave you every opportunity to tell me the truth, Effie. Every time I asked about your day, every time I mentioned that we needed to talk, I was hoping you'd be honest with me. The weight of all my lies and omissions crashed down on me. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm so sorry, Owen." "I know you are," he said, gathering up the papers. "But sorry doesn't undo the damage, and it doesn't change the fact that you made a choice every single day for weeks to prioritize your relationship with Silas over your marriage to me." He stood up, folder in hand, and headed toward the stairs. "Owen, wait," I called after him. "What happens now?" He paused at the bottom of the stairs. "Now you call a lawyer, and you figure out how to explain to Ruby why Mommy's moving out." As his footsteps disappeared up the stairs, I sat alone in the living room, surrounded by the wreckage of my marriage and finally understanding the true cost of that smirk. The law office of Thompson and Reed was intimidatingly formal, all dark wood and leather-bound books that made me feel small and exposed. I sat across from Owen's lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Thompson, who looked like she'd eaten cheating spouses for breakfast. "Mrs. Marchbanks," she said, spreading familiar photos across the mahogany table, "I think we need to discuss the reality of your situation." 3 days had passed since Owen's bombshell revelation, and I'd spent them in a haze of panic and desperate phone calls. My own lawyer, a harried-looking man named David Chen, who I'd found through a Google search, sat beside me looking overwhelmed. "My client is willing to consider reconciliation," David said weakly. "Perhaps we could discuss marriage counseling before proceeding with divorce." Patricia's smile was razor-sharp. "Mr. Chen, your client has been conducting an extramarital affair for weeks. She's been lying to her husband, sneaking around with her ex-boyfriend, and exposing their 8-year-old daughter to the instability of a broken home. Reconciliation isn't on the table." "It wasn't an affair," I protested. "We never slept together." Patricia pulled out a thick folder. "Let's review what we do have, shall we? 47 text messages between you and Silas Drummond over a 3-week period. Multiple photographs of intimate encounters, credit card receipts showing lunches and dinners that you lied about to your husband, and testimony from several witnesses who observed your behavior at the Nook on September 15th. My stomach dropped. "Witnesses? The bartender remembers you quite well. Apparently, your display was notable enough that several patrons commented on it. A married woman grinding against her ex-boyfriend while her husband watched isn't exactly subtle, Mrs. Marchbanks." The way she said it made me sound cheap and tawdry. "It wasn't like that." "Wasn't it?" Patricia slid another document across the table. "This is a sworn statement from your sister, Jocelyn Reeve. She confirms that you told her you were basically separated from your husband and that you were exploring your options with Mr. Drummond." I stared at Joss's statement in shock. My own sister had turned against me. She had every right to tell the truth when questioned under oath, Patricia interrupted. "Just as your co-workers had the right to confirm that you frequently left work early, for personal appointments that coincided with your meetings with Mr. Drummond. David shuffled through his papers nervously. What exactly is your client seeking in terms of settlement? Patricia's expression softened slightly, but her voice remained businesslike. Mr. Marchbanks is being quite reasonable, considering the circumstances. He's requesting primary custody of Ruby during the school year, with Mrs. Marchbanks having her every other weekend and alternating holidays. He'll keep the house, but he's willing to split the retirement accounts and other marital assets equitably. That's not equitable, I exploded. I'm her mother. You can't just take my daughter away from me. No one is taking your daughter away, Patricia said calmly. But Ruby needs stability. And frankly, Mrs. Marchbanks, your recent behavior doesn't suggest that you're in a position to provide that right now. She pulled out yet another document. This is a psychological evaluation recommendation. The court may require both parents to undergo counseling to determine the best custody arrangement for the child. My hands were shaking as I tried to process everything. I want to see Owen. I want to talk to him directly. That's not advisable, David said quickly. Actually, Patricia said, my client expected you might feel that way. He's waiting in conference room B if you'd like to speak with him. But I should warn you, anything you say can and will be used in these proceedings. 10 minutes later, I was sitting across from my husband in a sterile conference room, feeling like we were strangers. Owen looked tired but resolved, and when he spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. How are you holding up? He asked. The unexpected kindness in his question broke something inside me. How do you think I'm holding up? You're taking everything away from me. I'm not taking anything away, Effie. I'm protecting what's left of our family. By destroying it. Owen leaned back in his chair. You destroyed it the moment you decided Silas was more important than our marriage. I'm just dealing with the aftermath. I made a mistake, I said, tears flowing freely now. People make mistakes, Owen. That doesn't mean our entire marriage has to end. It wasn't a mistake, Owen said quietly. A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk or saying something hurtful when you're angry. What you did was make a series of deliberate choices over weeks and months. You chose to meet him. You chose to lie to me. You chose to kiss him. You chose to continue seeing him even after I gave you multiple opportunities to come clean. I was lonely. So was I, Owen said, and for the first time, I heard real pain in his voice. I was lonely too, Effie, but I didn't go looking for comfort in someone else's arms. Then why didn't you fight for me? I demanded. Why didn't you try to win me back instead of just documenting everything like some kind of private investigator? Owen was quiet for a long moment. Because I realized that the woman I married, the woman I fell in love with, wouldn't have needed to be won back. She would have remembered her vows and her family and chosen us over him. The words hit me like physical blows. So that's it? 15 years of marriage, and you're just throwing it all away. I'm not the one who threw it away, Owen said, standing up, but I'm also not going to spend the rest of my life wondering when you'll get lonely again. After he left, I sat alone in the conference room, finally understanding the magnitude of what I'd lost. It wasn't just my marriage. It was my family, my home, my entire life as I'd known it. The next few weeks were a blur of apartment hunting, awkward conversations with Ruby, and increasingly hostile encounters with people I'd considered friends. Sarah and Henry Marchbanks, Owen's parents, made their position clear by refusing to speak to me when I called. Joss avoided my texts and calls, apparently too ashamed of her betrayal to face me directly. Even at work, things became uncomfortable. Word had gotten out about the divorce, and my co-workers' attitudes toward me shifted noticeably. Linda, who had been sympathetic to my marriage troubles, became cool and professional after learning about Silas. I just feel bad for Owen, I overheard her telling another co-worker. He seems like such a nice guy, and she was running around behind his back the whole time. The isolation was crushing. Silas, who had been so attentive and supportive when I was a married woman seeking excitement, became noticeably less available once I was actually separated. This is all happening pretty fast, he said, when I called to tell him about the divorce proceedings. Maybe we should slow things down until everything gets sorted out. Slow things down, I repeated, incredulous. You're the one who kept telling me I deserved better than Owen. I know, but... Look, Effie, I care about you, but I'm not looking to be anyone's rebound relationship. You need time to figure out your life. The rejection stung more than I expected. After everything I'd sacrificed for him, Silas was backing away just when I needed him most. 3 weeks after that terrible night in the living room, I was packing boxes in what had been my home for 8 years, preparing to move into a cramped apartment across town. Ruby watched from the doorway, her face a mask of confusion and hurt. "Why can't you just say sorry to Daddy?" she asked. "When I do something wrong, I say sorry, and then things get better." I knelt down to her level, trying to find words that an 8-year-old could understand. Sometimes grown-up problems are more complicated than that, sweetheart. Sometimes sorry isn't enough to fix things. But you're still going to be my mummy, right? "Of course," I said, pulling her into a hug. "I'll always be your mummy, no matter what." But even as I said the words, I wondered if they were true. Owen had primary custody, Ruby would be living in her familiar home with her father, and I would become the weekend parent. The one who got the fun activities, but missed the daily moments that really mattered. As I taped up another box, I caught sight of myself in the bedroom mirror. I looked older, more tired, and somehow smaller than I remembered. The woman staring back at me had gotten everything she thought she wanted. Freedom from a boring marriage, validation from an attractive man, excitement and attention and drama. But she'd lost everything that actually mattered in the process. And for the first time since this whole mess began, I wondered if that smirk at the Nook had been worth it after all. 6 months later, I was sitting in my studio apartment, staring at my phone and trying to work up the courage to call Ruby. It was my weekend to have her, but she'd asked to stay at Owen's house instead because she had a sleepover party to attend. "Maybe next weekend, Mummy," she'd said when Owen called to ask if I minded the schedule change. Her voice was polite but distant, the way children speak to adults they don't know very well. My apartment was quiet and sterile, nothing like the warm, lived-in home I'd shared with Owen and Ruby. I'd tried to make it welcoming, buying bright throw pillows and hanging cheerful artwork, but it still felt temporary, like a hotel room I was staying in, while waiting for my real life to resume. The real life that was never coming back. Work had become my refuge, the one place where I could pretend to be normal and functional. But even there, things weren't the same. Linda and I maintained a professional relationship, but the easy friendship we'd once shared was gone. I'd become the cautionary tale, the woman who'd thrown away a good marriage for a fantasy that evaporated the moment it became reality. I was reviewing insurance claims when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. My heart jumped, hoping irrationally that it might be Owen, but the message was from someone I hadn't heard from in months. "Hey, Effie, it's Cleo Drummond. Can we talk?" Cleo was Silas's sister, someone I'd known peripherally through our shared social circle. I hadn't spoken to her since everything fell apart, but I'd heard through mutual friends that she'd been supportive of Owen during the divorce proceedings. "Sure," I texted back, curious despite myself. She called within minutes. "I hope you don't mind me reaching out," she said. "I know things have been complicated, but I felt like you should know something." "Okay," I said cautiously. "It's about Silas and Owen." My stomach clenched. "What about them?" "They had a conversation last week. Owen came to see Silas at his office. I couldn't imagine what Owen would want to discuss with Silas, especially after all this time." "What kind of conversation?" Cleo was quiet for a moment. "Effie, I think you should know that Silas has been telling people that you threw yourself at him, that you were the one pursuing him, and he was just being nice to an old friend." The words hit me like ice water. "That's not true." "I know it's not true. I was there that night at the Nook, remember? I saw how he was with you, how he deliberately sought you out and flirted with you in front of your husband." "But that's not the story he's been telling." I felt sick. What did Owen say to him? That's the thing, Cleo said. Owen didn't go there to confront him or cause drama. He went there to give him something. Give him what? A letter and some photos. My confusion must have been evident in my silence because Cleo continued. Effie, Owen had been documenting everything for months. Not just your meetings with Silas, but Silas's behavior too. His pattern of pursuing married women, the way he talks about his conquests, the fact that you weren't the first wife he'd targeted. I felt like the ground was shifting beneath me. What are you saying? I'm saying Owen put together a file on my brother that would destroy his real estate career if it ever became public. Photos, recorded conversations, testimonies from other women. And he gave it all to Silas with a simple message. Stay away from his family, stop spreading lies about his ex-wife, and the file stays private. I sank into my couch, overwhelmed. Owen did that. For me. He said that no matter what happened between you two, you were still Ruby's mother, and Ruby deserved to have a mother she could respect. He couldn't let Silas destroy your reputation completely. Tears were streaming down my face. Even after everything I'd done, even after the lies and betrayal and humiliation, Owen was still protecting me. There's more, Cleo said gently. Silas is leaving town. He's taking a job in Phoenix, says he needs a fresh start. But between you and me, I think Owen's file scared him more than he's admitting. After we hung up, I sat in my empty apartment and finally allowed myself to fully comprehend what I'd lost. Owen wasn't just a good father or a reliable provider. He was a good man. The kind of man who would protect his ex-wife's dignity even when she didn't deserve it. The kind of man who put his daughter's well-being above his own hurt and anger. And I had thrown him away for someone who was now spreading lies about me to save his own reputation. That evening, I drove to Owen's house, our old house, and sat in the car for 20 minutes, trying to work up the courage to knock on the door. Finally, I saw Owen come outside to get the mail, and our eyes met across the yard. He walked over to my car, and I rolled down the window. Cleo called me, I said without preamble. Owen nodded. I figured she might. Why? I asked. After everything I did, why would you protect me? Owen was quiet for a moment, looking back at the house, where warm light spilled from the windows. Because Ruby loves you, he said simply, and someday she's going to be old enough to hear all the stories and rumors about what happened. I want her to be able to hold her head up and know that her mother made mistakes, but wasn't the villain in everyone else's story. Fresh tears spilled down my cheeks. I don't deserve that. No, Owen agreed. You don't. But Ruby does. He started to turn away, then paused. For what it's worth, Effie, I hope you figure out what you're really looking for. Because whatever it wasn't worth what you gave up to find it. As he walked back to the house, I saw Ruby appear in the window, waving at me with the innocent enthusiasm of a child who still believed her parents might find their way back to each other someday. I waved back, knowing that some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. But maybe, with time and effort and genuine change, I could build something new with my daughter. Something honest and real, based on the person I wanted to become rather than the person I'd been. I drove away from my old life for the last time, finally understanding that the woman who had smirked at her husband while dancing with her ex-boyfriend was gone. In her place was someone who had learned, too late, the difference between wanting to be desired and deserving to be loved. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in months, I was facing it with clear eyes and honest intentions. It would have to be enough.